everyone, and welcome to the Not Content Podcast. On this podcast, we pull from the seemingly endless queue of movies, television shows, and maybe even other surprises along the way as part of our podcast channel, From the Queue. In this episode, we will review Little Giants.
If you never got picked for the team.
Kids like that, they can't help it, they're no good.
If you never got a chance to play.
Who are you, Vince Lombardi all of a sudden?
If you always dreamed of standing tall.
Timmy, I'm not sure, but I don't think that goes there.
This is your chance to be a giant.
Let's kick some. Somebody call 911!
Rick Moranis, Ed O'Neill.
I'll show you intimidation.
Little Giants, rated PG. Sneak preview this weekend. Check newspapers for theaters.
Please subscribe, like, and review From Q on YouTube or your favorite podcasting platform, especially Spotify and Apple, as you can get those algorithms going with positive feedback. You can also find our channel on BlueSky at From the Q. You no longer need an invite to get on a BlueSky. So BlueSky is now wide open for your usage. So please join BlueSky and get off of X as soon as possible. You can find us on Instagram, From the Q, as well as Threads. If you're listening to us on YouTube, all of our links can be found in the description. My name is Jerome Cuson. You can find me on BlueSky at JeromeC1985. You can also find me on Instagram at Jerome Cuson. My co-host is Brian DeBrain. You can find him on Twitter at Brian DeBrain. And Brian, hopefully you'll be joining BlueSky soon as well. At this point, I am going to turn the show over to you. This was your suggested movie for this month, as we are going through a bunch of football movies. So I will now turn it over to you to lead our conversation on a movie that I know you have a lot of affection for.
Oh, I saw this movie in theaters in probably that same weekend, that weekend of October 14, 1994. Man, 94 was a big year for movies, wasn't it, Jerome? You had Lion King, The Flintstones, this movie, Forrest Gump, like a lot of great movies. Pulp Fiction, 94 was a hell of a year, man. And I've argued before that maybe 94 is like an all-time GOAT year for movies. That's a whole other discussion. But yeah, just based on some of those movies I listed alone, Shawshank Redemption, like an incredible year. But Little Giants is like not remembered for being this classic movie. It's more of like this nostalgic movie, more of a cult classic, because if you look at the box office, it wasn't like a giant hit. It barely broke even. I would say, with the rentals, it broke even. At the actual box office, it was slightly below. So kind of a disappointment, but at the same time, it's kind of grown into like a love in like the football community, a lot of love for like the 35-year-olds and above kind of community that are us, because we watched this movie so many times, not just like on our own, but like they played this movie a lot in schools because it's like the perfect school movie for the 90s. You got Ed O'Neill, who's like the TV dad that everyone knew at the time, and then Rick Moranis, who everyone knew from Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. So all those elements coming together, mixing it with football, and then you got John Madden, and it's kid-friendly, and you got the cute boy, and you got the tough girl, like all those elements going for it with this, all these different tropes. But I think it's not quite, on the level of like The Sandlot, in my opinion, but it's a step below. But it still has these memorable moments that still stick out today. People still remember the annexation of Puerto Rico, which I don't like using that name, but today it's known as like the Little Giants play, but it's actually still like it's been used in actual football games, so that's kind of like influential in itself. So this movie has like a lot of influence, and just if you want to really go back and see Rick Moranis not be the goofy side character and like have a sort of serious role, this is the role for you to watch Rick Moranis do that, because I feel like he's like, it showed like the potential he had if he didn't like retire in the time he did. And I felt like he's one of those guys like a John Candy, Bill Murray, that can step above the comedy level and kind of maybe do some drama. And this kind of showed it for me a little bit.
This is very much a movie in the same vein as a lot of other 90s underdog kiddie sports movies. Think about The Sandlot, which I think in many ways shares a lot of the DNA. You also look at things like The Mighty Ducks, which I think this is even more clearly an homage to that movie. And really, you're just getting a lot of that thanks to movies like Major League in the late '80s, and then you get all these Rookie of the Year. I also think about that. I mean, not a sports movie, but there's also a Little Rascals remake that is coming out around this same time. So really, you're in an era of when this was a popular thing to do, and it just feels like we don't really get a lot of underdog sports movies. The last one that I can really think of is the one that Take It Away TT directed last year, and that movie did not do very well at all. But I look at this movie and I think it's got some charming moments. I think some of the kids are good. I think Rick Moranis is by far the best performance in this movie, and I'm sure we'll get to some additional information about him. I think Ed O'Neill's kind of a miscast, but I think this is a fun movie. It's definitely kind of in the lesser tier, in terms of underdog sports movies. For me, I look at the Bad News Bears, and Major League is the peak underdog sports movie. And I just think baseball in general is easier in terms of filming and executing. I just don't think football is very cinematic. And that's a weird thing to say because I think football is much more designed to be a television sport. But none of the football that I've seen has been particularly impressive and been shot well. So I just think for me, I think football as a sport, this doesn't work really as well. And, with Any Given Sunday, we kind of talked about the fact that, there's really the last 4 weeks of the season, and this is just kind of building up to one game, but with a bunch of kids in it. And it's just, I'm not sure if that totally works. So I appreciated the opportunity to revisit it, but this is definitely not for me a top tier sports movie.
Yeah, like I said, it's on the cusp. And it's really interesting that it's inspired by the 1992 McDonald's Super Bowl commercial. And I just watched this before we started recording. I didn't know anything about that. And I'm watching this commercial and I'm just like, oh, this is totally like the Little Giants vibe. You got two of the parents coming together to form a goalpost. You got these innocent kids who want to go to McDonald's after the game. So all these little things, I was like, oh, I get why they wanted to do that. And then, of course, Steven Spielberg watched that commercial and it's like, oh, we got to do that. I want that in a movie. Let's do that. And 2 years later, we get Little Giants, and this is actually produced by Amblin Entertainment, distributed through Warner Brothers. Right now, it's actually available on YouTube for free with ads, so that was kind of cool for us. And still, I feel like for a movie like Little Giants, I think it's a great movie to have for free. It's not, like I said, it's not on the level of Sandlot, but I think it's one of those movies that's perfect for a YouTube, for a free view on YouTube kind of thing. And then we got to mention the budget already. $20 million budget, only grossed 19 in the box office. Of course, it kind of broke even with rentals and stuff like that over time, obviously. But again, it's if you notice nowadays, it's not one of those kids movies. The Sandlot gets a lot of releases, I feel, on DVD and Blu-ray and stuff like that. Major League, Bad News Bears, all those movies. But Little Giants doesn't get the distribution I feel like it deserves. The VHS was a popular VHS, but then when DVD came out, it became less popular, I feel, which is weird. But then when, over time, I think the nostalgia kind of came back, and then you can kind of find it on like I said, YouTube and whatnot and streaming. But I feel like this has become a cult classic amongst the sports movie community or sports fan community more so. Because nowadays, this is one of those movies they don't play in schools, you know what I mean? But they played this a lot in the 90s, which kind of fit the time. It feels it's kind of hard to say this. I mean, it's a little controversial, but me and Jerome kind of feel like the 90s was kind of the peak in terms of hype in sports, in terms of Michael Jordan, the football era, all those things coming together, and then kind of mix it sort of with the MLB steroid era, which kind of peaked at the end of the 90s. So all that kind of just peaked around the 90s, and then we've been kind of trying to grasp for that era ever since. Do you kind of agree with me, Jerome?
I mean, it's tough to say. I think in terms of the NBA, I think the 90s is clearly the peak. I think in terms of baseball, it might be the 70s or the 80s. I think the NFL is maybe even a little bit later. It feels like we're still kind of in the NFL's peak at this point in terms of popularity, and that is undoubtedly helped by Taylor Swift becoming a football fan because of who she's dating. So I don't know. It's a little bit strange. I'm not sure that I agree that I think baseball had a lot of popularity issues in the '90s, and then the steroid era kind of brought them back, and then it's kind of gone down. And it just feels like baseball now is just kind of it's not as relevant as it used to be. I think that football is all the more relevant. And I think that the issue that this presents in terms of making a sports movie is because baseball isn't as popular, and yet it is clearly the more cinematic of the sports. You're not getting a lot of these classic underdog sports movies because, again, football is so much harder to film than baseball is. So you're just not getting that as much. I mean, the amount of underdog sports, even TV shows and movies that we're getting. I think of a Ted Lasso. Ted Lasso was obviously a huge deal, but there's not a lot of soccer actually being played in that series. I also think about the Mighty Ducks TV series and how that just very quickly came and went and left absolutely no impact on the culture whatsoever. But I don't know. I think we're in a very strange era, and I hope that we can bring back some of these types of movies that seemingly don't get made anymore. But I think that what this movie is able to do successfully is it is able to build up the relationship between the brothers. Well, I think that's the relationship that you can get most invested in. Like I said, I think the kids are very much a mixed bag in terms of their performances, but Rick Moranis is definitely somebody that I know that you want to talk about.
Yeah, it's interesting though that the casting of this movie, like originally they wanted Craig T. Nelson in the role of Kevin, which would be perfect, but he didn't want to be typecast because of the role of coach, which is understandable. But at the same time, it seemed like Ed O'Neill was already kind of being typecast anyway, because Al Bundy threw four touchdowns in a single game, and he mentions that on like every other episode of Married with Children. So it was kind of weird because I thought Craig T. Nelson would have been great, but I don't know if he's that kind of like a person that would want to be this kind of villain, like a family kind of villain. I don't know. It's weird.
I also don't know about the chemistry with Rick Moranis. I mean, like I said, I don't think Ed O'Neill is a perfect casting. I think he does. I think he gives a good performance, but again, I think it just comes down to do I necessarily buy him as this type of coach? And I'm not sure that I do, but I think he and Rick Moranis have pretty decent chemistry as well. And I don't know that Craig T. Nelson and Rick Moranis would necessarily have that same level of chemistry.
I mean, he's definitely got that football look based on coach, and I mean, he's a tall dude for sure as well. And that kind of discrepancy kind of threw me off a little bit because, brothers are usually the same height, but, sometimes for movie purposes, if you want the little brother to feel a little, like the underdog, you kind of cast him as the shorter one. And of course, Rick Moranis plays that role well. Originally, this was Gary Busey and Randy Quaid, which is like, wow. I don't even know the vibe of that movie. Oh my God. That's insanity on set right there. Jesus.
I don't know
keep
that
them
I'm
away from kids.
Be around yeah, I was just literally saying the same thing. Just keep them away from the kids. I don't know, man. That makes this a very different movie.
Yeah, Gary Busey is a whole different energy. If you ever look at the behind the scenes of Predator 2, it's almost as if he's trying to convince the audience behind the scenes of Predator 2 that everything is like tactically real and like so like real beyond real. And it's like, dude, you're making a fake movie. What are you talking about? Just relax. So Gary Busey brings that intensity to sets that I'm glad he didn't bring to this one. And of course, when they cast Rick Moranis, they actually wrote originally that Danny O'Shea was a widower, and then when Rick Moranis was cast, they had to change it because his wife died in real life in '91. And this is kind of like his second to last role. I think he did another Honey, I Shrunk the Kids after this, and then Bully, which I've also seen on VHS. And then he just retired. He had to raise his kids. And it's crazy to me because I was texting Jerome while watching this, and the scenes with him and his daughter, it's like he just seems like he's one of the all-time greatest dads ever, and it comes through the screen. And then once you realize, yeah, he gave up everything. He gave up a career to raise his kids by himself, and it's like the sacrifice that a parent would do that for their kid. You know what I mean? Like give up their dreams for their kids, kind of thing. So I was just in awe of this guy, the kind of parent that he comes through the screen.
Yeah, especially in the aughts. I mean, he could have had an unbelievable run. in kind of smaller character actor type roles, and maybe doing an Apatow movie or two. Like he just would have had an all-time run, but he made the best decision. I don't know. Here's to me the biggest problem with this movie, and again, this is coming from an adult perspective, so maybe it's a little bit different if you're a kid. But when Icebox when she's yelling at him, I am not on her side at all. Again, for me, that's one of the biggest problems with this movie is that I don't think she's a very good actress, and like it really came through. And I don't know what that's like. I said, I try not to be too harsh on kid actors because they can be a mixed bag. I think it's very difficult just acting as a child, and especially because we're talking about 11 and 12-year-olds, especially. Like I think that's a really awkward age. But yeah, Shauna Waldron as Becky O'Shea, it was just her character was just kind of all over the place, and I didn't necessarily. I think a lot of the problem was in the writing, but that scene with Danny, like I felt more sorry for Danny, and I think that's not what the movie wants me to feel.
Yeah, I think Shauna Waldron like really brings the physicality to the role. Obviously, she's like the big girl that's willing to take on the boys and kind of thing. So she's got the China kind of gimmick, which I kind of compared like the relationship between her and Devon Sawa Jr. It's almost like an Eddie China relationship they got going on. Which is kind of interesting because that dynamic actually kind of works. You know what I mean? It's like you got the bigger girl and the kind of the smaller guy, but like she's not supposed to be so like aggressive and like that trope. If you want to call it a trope, but I've seen that dynamic in movies and TV shows before. But I think that works, and I think that's why the China Eddie Guerrero like thing works so well because of that dynamic. And I think it works here. It's just like she doesn't deliver dialogue well. So it's like the scene with like Ed O'Neill at the diner. It's like it's clunky. It's a little clunky because Ed O'Neill's obviously carrying the conversation, and she's just trying to like, you know, be at his level, but she can't be at his level. You know what I mean? But at least during the football, at least when she's playing football, I think she's doing a great job because she's got the look and she's doing like it looks like she's actually tackling the kids, which is great because it comes off well. And then especially like at the end when you see like the dress under or the cheerleader outfit underneath, it just creates this cool visual of her being this badass. So in terms of like the presentation of her character, I liked it. It's just like me and my speeches and my speech about kid actors. Like she's definitely like in terms of like line delivery, like a 5 out of 10. But like the way she presents the character, that's like a 7.5 out of 10 for me. So that's what kind of worked for me. And I did like the chase scene at the beginning of the movie. So actually, just really quick, if you don't know the plot already, it's about two brothers, Ed O'Neill and Rick Moranis, the O'Shea brothers. Kevin, played by Ed O'Neill, is the more successful brother, and he's trying to start a Pee Wee football team. And he doesn't pick all the players, obviously. He doesn't pick the quote-unquote losers or whatever. So Rick Moranis says, okay, I'm going to get all these kids that weren't picked, put them on a team, and then get some other random kids, and then putting together as a team, and then face off, and then the winner gets to be the team for the town, I guess, which kind of ends up they just merge anyway. But that's where the plot kind of gets kind of weird because obviously nowadays Pee Wee football has all these regulations and stuff like that, zoning, like certain kids have to play in a certain team because based on where they're at kind of thing. So the idea that two teams would face off to be the representing team of the town just makes no sense because nowadays, I think even in the 90s, they just pick every kid anyway. So in terms of the plot mechanics of this movie, it's like, okay, what are we doing here? Like
that feels like more of a 21st century invention. I don't know. I think in the 90s, again, I wasn't an athlete when I was a kid, so I can't speak to how it worked in every place, but especially in football in the 90s, I could see this still being a thing. But I mean, at this point, like, I don't know. I mean, athletics and the competitive nature of it. I mean, that's one of the reasons that I would never want to have kids because I would not want to deal with that business.
Because like I played baseball in like '98, and we were all picked. There was no one that was not picked. So when I watch this movie now, it's like that wouldn't do that. You know what I mean? And then of course they're training for the game, and then randomly the underdog kids just run into John Madden and like Bruce Smith and Emmett Smith and Tim Brown, and they just all of a sudden teach them how to play football in like a 1 hour span. So it's one of those typical tropes and cliches, but you can't help but have like a John Madden in this. And I know John Madden's a big a hero in your life, I guess. He's not so big in mine, but like he's still like this great commentator, coach, or I would even say business mind as well a football mind, because like I mean he licensed his own like self for the Madden games, which is still paying his estate today because all the Madden games are still like selling every year. So in terms of
I mean,
that, he's got to have a good business mindset, right?
that's where he made his money. I mean, he certainly did make some good money as a commentator, but attaching his name to the only officially licensed NFL game, I mean, that's a huge deal. And I mean, I'm sure they're going to change the name at some point, but it's not going to be for a while because it's just so iconic and it's such a part of that game. And I think that's going to be his legacy more than anything is going to be the video game, even more so than the coaching, which he has the highest winning percentage in the history of the NFL in terms of being a coach. He coached for 10 years, and then he's like, I'm done. And then he did commentary for 20 years, and then he's like, I'm done. And I think that part of what makes John Madden so fascinating is that when he's done with something, he's just kind of done with it. And yeah, he is definitely somebody that when you first start watching football, especially in the 90s on Fox, like he's a big deal. Like he's just this gregarious like uncle that just teaches you football and is very enthusiastic about it. And I definitely think that is something that we don't really have as much with a lot of football commentators. I think the enthusiasm and joy is something that we need more of. But yeah, I think John Madden in this movie, like he's fine. I don't think he's particularly special. I mean, it feels like they tried to script lines for John Madden at that. I would have just let him go. Just be like, here's the scene, do it. It's just. I mean, and the other thing is that John Madden has a very particular chemistry with Pat Summerall, his commentating partner, and it's really hard to match that because if you've ever listened to those two call a game, it is very specific, and it is not something that is going to necessarily work. I mean, there's a reason that those two are so closely associated with each other, and even though John Madden went on to do commentary with Al Michaels, it's just what he had with Pat Summerall is something that can never be recaptured. And yeah, so yeah, what are two movies that John Madden is in that have a football relationship?
Yeah, I kind of compare him to a Gorilla Monsoon, to be honest, man. Like just that presence and like that knowledge, and then taking that knowledge into commentary. So yeah, I just kind of missed that too.
So it's funny you say that. Do you realize who was the coach of one of the All Madden teams?
No.
Bobby Heenan.
Oh my god. There you go, people. Full circle when it comes to wrestling on this podcast, obviously. So
yeah, I'm gonna look up the year, but yes, he was named the 1988 All Men team. Bobby Heenan was named the manager, and there was a rumor that they wanted to get John Madden to actually call WrestleMania 4, which would have been something else. I'll tell you what, if it was Gorilla Monsoon, Jesse Ventura, and John Madden, that would have been an all-timer.
I mean, look, we all know how we feel about WrestleMania 4. Personally, for both of us, it's very nostalgic. We kind of like watch it just for almost like the
there's a reason it's called WrestleMania 4, too.
I mean, yeah, but it's still like the commentary in the background is somewhat relaxing for the both of us. I think for that show particularly because it's so long, but it's just so much historic stuff going on. You know what I mean? In terms of historic stuff, like we talk about that play, the annexation of Puerto Rico. Basically, it's a fake out, right? Like they fake a run. And then they almost they convinced like Spike, who's like the pseudo kid bad guy in this movie.
I want to know if Spike and Mike, his father, where were they on January 6th? That's what I want to know.
I got confused and almost thought the dad was the dad from Iron Claw, and then I realized they're two separate actors, and I was like, whoa, I'm getting vibes on that. I'm both like it's like the similar vibe right there, man. But yeah they're very. I don't want to assume MAGA, but they. Almost are in 93 or whatever, but yeah, Spike talks in the third person, so I thought that was a really fun character thing to do with him. But yeah, so they fake the ball and essentially they give it to the guy who's least likely to have the ball, and then they're doing these laterals. to the point where he gets to the last dude and then he runs the ball to the end zone. So, I mean, it's not like we haven't seen that before. I think it's more popularized now because I think I don't know what it is, but coaches just have more balls nowadays where they just run on fourth down. Like, you know what I mean? Like that was almost never a thing when I was a kid. But haven't you noticed there's more fourth down plays now than ever before?
Yes, because there is an analytics department now, and that's one of the things that I was saying to you via text message is that the kids who did not make the team, they're going to end up running these teams because they're going to go to college and they're going to get into the algorithms and they're going to become analytics people, and they're actually going to be sitting in office suites making six figures for 30 years as opposed to playing for 2 to 3 years or 4 years or 5 years and getting a bunch of concussions. So really, the kids who got cut ultimately are the big winners. And you're right, there is a lot more going for it on fourth down, which I very much approve of. I think it's better for the sport. But Brian, I don't know if you noticed this, but there were some kids that got concussions and it wasn't really addressed. I don't know. It's that did not make me feel good.
Yeah, again, we had no one knew what CTE was back then, man. Jesus, they were barely teasing it or acknowledging it in 1999 and Any Given Sunday. So yeah, it's some brutal shots in this movie, but it's part of that, what football was in the 90s, that hard-hitting style. No one knew what concussions were, and these kids are just, I mean, I think the kid at the end got a concussion when he hit the fucking pole. So that was on the winning play.
Undoubtedly.
Oh my God. And that poor kid was like barely fitting in his uniform too. So I thought that was a nice gimmick too, that the kid was so small that he had to pop his head like a turtle out. That was pretty interesting. So in terms of the positives, yeah, solid performances, nostalgic kid moments. They played this a lot in school. I think the football game as a whole is booked well, but looking back now, it's clear they stole like the game almost verbatim from the movie we're going to discuss next week. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. 90 minutes, perfect, and that's pretty much all the positives. In terms of the negatives, the inconsistent plot, I didn't like the fact that the NFL players just showed up at random, even though John Madden is known for busing around the country. I thought that was interesting, but just, hey kid, we're trying to get to here, and then all of a sudden the kid just brings them to their practice, kid movie friendly type stuff. And so let's talk about Janusz Kaminski for a second. I mean, he shot, like you mentioned last week, Schindler's List, amongst other things. Yet here he does the most basic cinematography ever. Like, it's nothing special about this movie cinematography-wise, right?
I don't think so. I mean, I believe that there's a lot of Spielberg adjacent elements to this movie. The director of this movie, I know, edited Return of the Jedi. This is an Amblin Entertainment movie. Obviously, Spielberg kind of it was his idea after he watched a McDonald's commercial. So there's a lot of Spielberg adjacent material here. I mean, look, again, after shooting Schindler's List, wouldn't you want to shoot this movie? Like, I'd just be like, you know what? Just give me something very basic that I could shoot in my sleep just to kind of recover and get my druthers after what had to be just an emotionally harrowing experience, literally recreating the Holocaust. I can totally understand just kind of doing something like this.
I mean, I get it. It just seems so like I didn't even think about like the cinematography because I just remember this movie being looking basic, and I hate to use the word mid, but as the kids say, mid. But and then looking back at who shot it, it's like, damn, it's like.
I mean, Janusz Kaminski has done more than enough in his career to be regarded as one.
Hey, believe me, I get it. He took a break, and it's fine. I think the one shot that is very Spielberg is the shot at the end where the water tower changes to the O'Shea brothers. That feels like very Spielberg, in my opinion.
I mean, the score feels like a John Williams knockoff. That all of the beats of the music felt very much like, okay, this is somebody trying to be John Williams.
Yeah, and then it just doesn't become memorable at all. And then another note too is that Dwayne Dunham did not complete like the shoot. They had to like take him off because I guess he was having a lot of trouble shooting the football scenes, which we talk about. Like, it's hard to shoot football scenes. Like, the last two movies we reviewed couldn't get it right at night. Even Oliver Stone couldn't get it right at nighttime. And this was during the day they were shooting this game, and they couldn't finish it on time. So what does that tell you about shooting football movies, man? But I guess it's a lot harder than it seems. So But yeah, that's kind of unfortunate. But he did, finish it up in post, and he was able to kind of give his vision of the movie, and it was fine. He did a good job. And the only other thing that I kind of wanted was more character resolution. Like, I wanted like a post scene to like see the brothers together at a dinner with the whole family kind of gimmick, like a sign of unity. And we didn't get that. It was just more like, yeah, we're gonna tolerate each other for now because we're brothers and we kind of dislike each other kind of gimmick. But I would like to see like, what's up with Junior and the daughter. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot left on the table that they just kind of walked away from on the field, literally. But because they set these things up in the movie, like, is there going to be this like relationship between the daughter and Junior, and they just leave that on the table? Is like they kind of implied that he's going to get back together with the girl that he had a crush with in middle school, Rick Moranis, but we don't see that. And there was like some like I wouldn't say total friction, but there was some friction between Ed O'Neill and his wife for putting his brother.
The boy was there. Yeah, that's got to be a really awkward way home.
I know that conversation on the way home has got to be like, oh my God, like he knows he's fucked, but
what if that is how Married with Children? Like, that is actually the prequel to Married with Children.
Wouldn't surprise me if something like that. But man, that conversation.
In Ohio.
Yeah, and that's
he
also
has to become a shoe salesman instead of owning his own place. Like,
that's also the mom for the Monster Squad, so I'll always remember her from that. So I thought that was interesting, and that look she gives him from the stand, classic. He's fucked. So overall, I'll give this like a 6.5 out of 10. Compared to like a Sandlot, I'd say Sandlot's like a 7.5 out of 10. So that's kind of my scale, if you want like a comparison. And I think it does a good job. It has a lot of memorable moments. You know what I mean? I think the Icebox is one of those characters that has like inspired girls for decades now, I think, in terms of like sports. And I wouldn't be surprised if they kind of did some kind of commercial with the Icebox character and bring that back and show how like she's influenced other female athletes throughout the years. I think that'd be really cool.
I don't think there's no chance, given that Warner Brothers owns this movie, and they would delete the movie for tax purposes even before. I mean, I saw Bugs Bunny in this, and I literally expected David Zaslav to walk in and just escort Bugs out of the movie and just say, we're writing you off for insurance purposes.
I think you just wrote a scene in Gremlins 3.
Again, another franchise that Warner Brothers owns.
Do you see what I did there? Because based on what the thing on Gremlins 2 at the beginning with Bugs Bunny, so yeah, I get what you're saying. There's not a lot of love for Bugs Bunny right now in terms of Warner Brothers, but I've seen the tweets, and you never know. This deleted Roadrunner movie, Wile E. Coyote movie.
Wile E. Coyote movie.
It could just randomly appear, folks. I'm just saying, it could just randomly appear online, and
I mean,
that's
listen, the intern who releases that movie in Batgirl, they will not be the heroes that we deserve, but they're the ones that we needed. And I just like them canceling the movie only makes me want to see it more, and it's just absurd, ridiculous. Getting back to this movie, I give it like a 5.5 out of 10. I think it is. I think it's fine, but it doesn't ever really feel like it elevates above fine. I think Rick Moranis gives a very good performance, and again, it's sad that we don't get a lot more from him, because I think he's perfect in this very role. And you see him in Ghostbusters, he's acting all wacky and stuff, and here he's just a normal dad. And look, I am not a huge fan of the Ghostbusters franchise as it stands right now. But if Rick Moranis wants that money, if he wants that check after the sacrifices he made, I will wholeheartedly endorse whatever Rick Moranis chooses to do with his life and with his career moving forward. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, if you look at those trailers for the new Ghostbusters movie coming out, all the old actors are in the trailer except for one, and that's Rick Moranis. So I don't know if they're like hiding him, and he's going to get this big reaction from the fans, and I don't know if the fans know the whole story behind him, but I think the fans that do are going to get, if he is in it, are going to be emotionally reacting like I was at the end of Ghostbusters Afterlife. So yeah, that's what I'm hoping for. I don't want to hope it too much, because I don't want this to be like me hoping that Christopher Daniel Barnes is going to be in the last Spider-Verse movie as the Spider-Man from the 90s. I can only hope, but I can only hope for Rick Moranis to come back in this one. So that's kind of the wrap up for this week's discussion of the movie. Next week, I guess I'm going to take over hosting again, because it's another movie I've been kind of pushing Jerome to watch, and it's really up our alley. It's got Robin Williams and Kurt Russell, and they play two friends that are trying to recreate their high school football memories in the best of times from 1986. So this is like Kurt Russell in his prime, being like a quarterback. Robin Williams trying to be a wide receiver, but clearly can't be like, he doesn't have the physicality to play football, so that plays into it. It's a really interesting watch. Some characters are kind of reuniting from the thing, or some actors are kind of reuniting from the thing, and you'll see some other side character or like character actors from that era as well in this movie. But I think it's a really interesting watch. I'm waiting for Jerome's reaction because I've been hyping this up since I watched it last year. I can't wait to watch it again. And then there's this one moment I think Jerome's going to lose his mind for because it's one of those epic sports movie moments that just makes you jump out of your chair and go, "Fuck yeah!"
I am very much looking forward to this. I'm obviously a fan of Robin Williams as well as Kurt Russell. So it's going to be a very unique experience watching this because I have not seen it, and I am very curious to see what a Robin Williams and Kurt Russell movie looks like. So that is what we are going to discuss next week.
So yeah, it's continuing football month, and I'm doing the hosting duties again next week. So it's going to be interesting because I'm really excited for next week's episode because we're both big Kurt Russell marks and huge Robin Williams marks. So yeah, we're really excited. So thank you for listening to this week's episode. We'll talk to you again next week, and that's the Not Content Podcast for you.